Last week when I was scrolling X, I spotted this tweet from Motion announcing that they've fully ported Motion for React over to Vue.js, which is very exciting. My first thought was I'd like to add a Motion component to Stellify to give people the ability to just tap into this API. People like myself that aren't necessarily all that capable with when it comes to using the CSS animations and web animations API. Full support for that stuff exists. If that's the sort of thing that you're used to using outside of Stellify, you have experience using that stuff, then by all means continue to create your animations that way. But I thought for those of you that are like me when it comes to skills in that department, Motion is really handy. It's a beautiful API. I'm going to show you how to define that API within Stellify to create fantastic animations of your own. So here we have, this is Motion's homepage, just to give you a flavor, those of you that haven't encountered Motion. Here's a little flavor of some of the animations that you'd be able to produce. Beautiful. Okay, so let's have a look at how those animations can be created in Stellify. We have an API here, or it documents the API on these pages. You can see here we need to create an element, and we have properties such as animate, and we pass in an object with a key and a value. So let's see. Let's go over to Stellify and see how we might do that. So I've started off with just a circle that I've centered in a grid, and you'll notice when you go to an element type that we now have this motion type. So we need to select that first of all so that we can get the correct options in our edit element window. And what we need to do, this is the current way of doing things. I'm going to tweak this, but for now we select initial, and we can add our key. So let's say we'll start with an initial scale value of 0. And how about, what else can we do? Opacity maybe. We'll set that to 0. And then we switch the property to animate, and we can say scale 1 and opacity 1. Okay, we'll close that window, and then if we reload the page, you can see there we have this kind of bouncing effect. So what I said there about we're going to change this in the future, I think what's a much more Stellify way to go about this would be to have those objects defined separately, or indeed any of the values, but particularly the objects. So if we define these values separately from the element itself as a separate entity, then we can just reference whichever object or whichever value we want within our element, and then we have just one version of that particular setup. Okay, this is for those of you that aren't familiar with Stellify, this is how we go about things. So rather than having these kind of nested objects that contain all of this config, some of which doesn't necessarily specifically relate to the element itself, we extract it out and then we just reference it elsewhere. It's a really clean way to go about doing things. If you want to learn more about Stellify and the internals of how Stellify works, and or I should say the overarching philosophy, then there are lots of other videos on our channel or information, written articles on our social media. So go and have a little browse around. But yeah, in the future, I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to extract this out. There'll be an option where you can go in, create your object. I think it's probably something as well that I've always had in mind to do in the code editor itself. Okay, so the code editor, for those of you that don't know, is here. You can create files and what have you. We could perhaps create our objects separately in that code editor context, and then we can go back over to our interface and then just link up to those objects rather than have to define them visually on the sidebar, which I think is a bit clunky, especially if you have objects nested within objects and things start to get complicated. I don't think that is the case necessarily for Motion, but potentially moving forward, if we're going to involve other APIs, then that could be a tripping point, and I don't want to get to a stage where I have to kind of alter everybody's implementations to adapt to a new version. So I think if we get in early with this stuff, then I think that's a good idea. But for now, those of you that want to play around with Motion, hopefully that was enough information to at least get you going. As I say, you have the API here. You can have a little look around at what's possible, and if, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, if Motion isn't necessarily for you and you want to just do things in a more standard manner using the existing CSS web animations approach, then as I said, all those definitions are created by Stellify, so you can code those definitions using, if we just go back to this page, we do that using where is it, animations, that one, and then more animation options. That brings up this screen here, and that's where you define your keyframes, and there are certain options. Once you've defined your animation, there are options that come up that relate to the web animations API for you to trigger your animation or alter the timeline, that type of thing, jump around the timeline, I should say. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to talk about for this video. Catch you later.